Good afternoon to everyone from London, from gloomy London, I would say, although I'm locked in a room. But let me say first, thank you to making this possible. I think it's 21st century, and it's a good way that we can actually do this like this. I'm going to talk about some noise abatement and active noise abatement at Heathrow. Let me just check, is everything okay in terms of sound? Please just give me a shout if it's not clear. And please bear with me because we haven't really rehearsed all of this. So I'm going to be asking for the next slide probably a lot. So please bear with us and kind of leave us to do the presentation, please, if that's at all possible. I can answer the questions at the end. So if I can have the slides on as Heathrow today, that will be brilliant. So very brief introduction as to what Heathrow is right now and what Heathrow might be in the future. 75 million passengers, 76,000 employees and 400 companies, some numbers just to give you an idea of what this place is all about. Quite importantly, what we keep talking about quite recently is that it's the biggest port in the United Kingdom by value, where 29% of the non-EU exports go via Heathrow. Most importantly, and this goes back to the noise part as well, the world's busiest two-runway airport and operating at 98% of the runway capacity, which obviously is an average. So in summer, it even can go above 100%, and in winter it will probably drop below the 98%. But this is the main highlight, and this is quite an important thing because meaning that Heathrow is operating at capacity, this in turn means that we've got a limited ability to recover from disruption, and it's often very, very difficult with only little headroom that we have in our daily flight schedule to recover from any disruption. The trouble is that this extends to the noise problem as well, because what happens is that if the particular disruption affects operations, that it places the aircraft in different non-typical locations or positions as they are approaching Heathrow or as they are departing from Heathrow. This changes the noise environment as well and the noise climate for the local communities as well. So that's quite an important point. So if I can have the next slide, please, that talks about the challenges and a couple of words around what the challenges are that we face in here at Heathrow in general. So I've talked about operating at capacity and having the ability to recover from disruption in those conditions, or those being the main challenges that we face on a daily basis. But at the same time, what we come up against is also what we call the social license to grow, which, in other words, if you like, is all about gaining the acceptance and approval for expansion when facing a variety of stakeholders. Now, that can be anything between the government, the CAA, the local community, the airline stakeholders. All of these have to be on board in a certain way, and that pretty much is a very important element. I'm going to talk about that a bit later as well. But another challenge almost is the airspace modernization, which is quite an imperative one. It's one that has been talked about quite a lot recently because of the recent announcement around the government backing for the third runway at Heathrow. But as you can imagine, the importance of this is that there's quite a strong link between the capacity of the airspace, the demand that the airspace needs to be able to absorb, ideally without shocks and disruption, and effectively, again, linking back to the noise environment, this will all affect the noise climate around the airport, especially maybe not even in sort of lateral sense or the position-wise for aircraft. It's more about the times probably that this means aircraft operations happen. So when what we call the late runners and traffic departing after our noise quota period time has started at 23:30, that is a particularly sensitive time for the local communities. And there is quite a strong link between the capacity of the airspace and the demand that the airspace needs to handle. And then last but not least, there is the massive challenge of building trust with our local community. And this almost goes back to the part that talks about the license to grow. So we want to gain the acceptance and the approval from the local community to be able to expand. Now, what this means that there's a lot of things that we do at Heathrow, and the three kind of main themes that we revolve around when we do our work and anything that we do is that we are looking to do realistic operational improvements. This has to be something that in reality makes a difference to the people. At the same time, we kind of recognize and have started to recognize recently that there's a lot of perception that affects the attitude of the community towards the airport, and in general sort of drives the support or aversion towards the airport and how it performs. However, we know that this is only part of the story, but at the same time, there is the whole lot around demonstrable evidence, which is effectively saying, this is what we've done, this is what we've changed, this is the measurable difference that we have made to operations and to the noise environment, and here is the evidence that this has actually happened. So these are the kind of three main elements that we keep talking about. If I can have the next slide, which some of you may find surprising, perhaps some of you may not find it surprising at all. But what we are talking about here is that this is the same challenges that I've just spoken about, but perhaps expressed in a single picture. So as you can imagine, an environment like this, where the ATC is trying to keep the traffic safe, or well, not trying to, but working really hard to keep the traffic safe. The airports and the airlines want to deliver their schedule and make profit. And at the same time, the community wants guaranteed and predictable periods of rest. Can be a highly challenging job. So just to explain what's in the picture, it says in the caption, but what you're looking at is effectively where the green lines meet up or converge into a single point is where Heathrow is in that. The green lines are Heathrow departures. The red ones are arrivals, and the blue ones are all the flights that have got nothing to do with Heathrow, but obviously take up parts of the airspace and the capacity of it. The serious challenge in relation to Heathrow traffic for ATC problem resolution, and last but not least, again, they contribute, even if whether we like it or not, they contribute to the noise environment that people may find kind of subjective or objective. It doesn't really matter, but it drives the perception of what happens and is attributed to Heathrow effectively. So that's just a picture that describes those challenges. If I can have the next slide, please, that talks about what the noise today looks like and what it used to look like back in the 1970s, which is when the first contours have been created and drawn. Now, what this picture says is that effectively looking back 40 odd years, really, flights at Heathrow have doubled since that time. But at the same time, some of the noise level contours have fallen tenfold. Now, I'm not trying to take all of the credit, and I'm not at all saying that this is all down to what the airport does or how the airport does it. And there's absolutely a massive chunk of this that's due to advances in technology, but it is certainly not the whole story. And the part of the story that is not the technology I'm going to talk about in my slides further on. So just to give you an idea of what this used to look like and what it looks like now. So as you can see, quite a big chunk of London used to be affected by these contours in the past. So now talking about noise today and into the future. So if I can have the next slide, please, again. Couple of things that we do, and literally it's not an exhaustive list in this slide. Some of these I'm going to talk about a bit more, and some of them are just mentioned there. But continuous descent approaches, track keeping, airspace trials of all sorts, even a flight quiet program, but also landing gear deployment, late running aircraft, and the reduction of the late running aircraft in general, to give, again, the community the rest that they deserve and they want. But also 320 retrofits, to get rid of what is called a very whiny, or what is sometimes referred to by people out there as a whining noise that is unbearable. That is another thing that we keep an eye on, and that we try to actively move forward and progress. But also in general, Chapter 3 voluntary phase out, so trying airlines into a place where they proactively drop the use of Chapter 3 aircraft, which is one of the noisier categories, if you like. And this is done all via the charging scheme and charging systems that we have here at Heathrow. So recently we have increased the charges for Chapter 3 aircraft quite significantly, just to discourage the use of these aircraft at the airports. So what does it mean? All of this is just a list, a summary of activities that we do here at Heathrow. In the next slide, if I can have that, please, is a nice publication or the summary of what we put out to people in terms of our commitments. We call this, we have called this the new noise blueprint of 2016 and 2017, and it effectively sets out the objectives and the topics that we want to be focusing on in the next couple of years, in really the short term, but some of them are really longer term investments as well into gaining the trust of the community. So the three main categories of actions here in this slide are literally, again, going back to the technology, noise at source. What does it mean to get the dB levels down at the source and as they propagate down to the ground level, and what can be done? What can we encourage in this sense to airlines to do? The other thing is the procedures that the airlines are then choosing to do, whether that's voluntary or we can again steer them in a certain way, one way or the other, and we can again encourage or discourage people from doing something, or well, giving them incentives maybe as well. And the last thing is, and this is quite a lot, as you can see, well, 5 dots are sitting in the gray area, is the collaboration with the community. And that's almost literally giving the people out there the ability to do their own science around data, around investigating what's going on at Heathrow, even giving them tools to make complaints via online tools, such as the web track, which is one of the tools that we've got here and that is publicly available on the website. All of this is there because we want to be trusted and believed in what we say, and that we can do in our commitments in that sense. And that's really a high priority consideration in our approach. And it is the central element of pretty much everything that we do here at Heathrow. So now, basically, that was a bit of an introduction and a summary. And I'd like to talk about some of the details now. So if I can have the next slide, please, again, which is all about what the AIP, or the Aeronautical Information Publication, talks about and says for, around topics that go back to noise. So the first one that we have set out as a very clear requirement at Heathrow is a 1,000-foot rule, or what we call a 1,000-foot rule, and a 4% noise abatement climb gradient. I'm not going to repeat what it says in the slide around the citation or the quotation from the AIP, but effectively what we are setting out in the AIP is that we want the aircraft to be 1,000 foot when they are 6.5 kilometers from the start of the roll, which is the far end, if you like, of the runway, as they are starting the roll on the runway. And we want them thereafter to maintain a 4% climb gradient at all times. Now, whilst this requirement has been there in the AIP for a long time, really, we have not been able to monitor and identify the infringements of the 4% climb gradient so far. And that is in the first place because the noise and track keeping system that we have got currently was looking at the average gradient between the 1,000 and the 4,000 foot, where this whole 4% gradient ceases to apply. But right now, with our ANOM supplier, we're working on new functions and basically modifications to the system that is going to let us actually identify the 4% gradient infringements all along the way. And that is all to be achieved by actually changing what the noise preferential route corridors look like in the system. So rather than having blocks of airspace that extend from the ground to 4,000 foot, effectively, after the 1,000 foot point, we are going to create a sloping corridor, effectively, that has got floor to it that is not extended to the ground. So I may have mentioned a term there that is not clear to probably a lot of you, or maybe most of you. So if I can have the next slide, I'm going to explain in a second. So another AIP requirement in terms of noise, or controlling noise, or putting the noise into contained spaces, if you like. That's another one, which is track keeping and the continuous descent approaches. So I've merged this into one slide because I would like to talk about these in one go, effectively. So what you are looking at in the left-hand side set of pictures is a sample of tracks going down one of the standard instrument departure routes, and the corridor that might be quite faint in the picture, but it's effectively that noise preferential route that I've talked about previously. Now, these noise preferential routes are set by the Department of Transport, and they were set in those locations by the Department for Transport some 50 years ago, and they have been kept in place since then, effectively. But the primary purpose of these corridors was to contain noise within those corridors. So the definition of track keeping problem, or definition of a track keeping infringement in this sense, as a violation to the AIP requirement, is that if an aircraft is not vectored by the ATC, but at the same time infringes the sides of this corridor, they will be flagged as a track keeping infringement. Now, this is a statistic that basically goes out to the public domain. It goes back to the government, and they both of these stakeholders or types of audience look at these figures, and it's quite a telling story. So currently the track keeping at Heathrow is about 95%. So we got only a small proportion of traffic that would violate the track keeping requirement in this sense. But as we are finding, this is, as you can imagine, 5% of a lot of a whole lot of traffic. If we talk about this in exact numbers, we have 240,000 departures in a year of the two runways. So if you imagine 5% is still quite a lot in that sense. So this is what we are trying to deliver to the community, to increase that track keeping closer to the 98, 99, and ideally closer to the 100%, so that we can say, well, this is actually the noise that is contained most of the times, almost without exceptions, within these corridors. Now, these corridors are 3 kilometers wide in terms of technical details, just wanted to put it there. There's not much space to be used in this sense. And the utilization of this space, as you can see in those two pictures, is all about fitting in those corridors in such way that you don't come out when you fly in the aircraft that way. So that's for the track keeping, and it goes back to the previous point as well. But the second bit is all about the continuous descent approaches, which is, again, one of the things that has been talked about for a long time. My colleague has spoken in this very same conference about this topic, I think 5 years ago it was. But since then, obviously, things evolve in a certain way. And again, the noise and track keeping system that we've had back then was slightly different, and it's much better now. It's got better resolution. The radar data that we get is better resolution, and we really like to say that the noise and track keeping system that we have allows us to measure this quite precisely, which is again one of the things that we want to put out to the public domain to say this is really good quality information, and you should really trust us. So that's one of the purposes. But in terms of the definition for the continuous descent approach, what we are saying is below 6,000 feet, there should be no level flight, or if there is one, then it should be only one phase of level flight, and it shouldn't be longer than 2.5 nautical miles in length. If one of these two conditions is violated, or sorry, if the second condition is violated, and it's not the previous one, therefore it is a CDA infringement. So that's almost something that has been around for a long time, maybe one that's more in the public domain, which I'm talking about now, the CDA, I do apologize. But there's something that's very specific to Heathrow, which is track keeping. So that's for the AIP requirements. Obviously, there's much more. There are noise infringements in the AIP requirements as well, but I'm not going to talk about those right now. What I would like to talk about, though, is the next slide, if I can have that, please. Fly Quiet program, and I do apologize to the person who is, I think, the following slot, who is talking about his Fly Quiet program at San Francisco. So this is obviously our take on things, and maybe a slightly different one than the other program or the other programs of this sort out there. But what we also started doing back in 2013, now this is a production and publication of quarterly league tables where we rank the top 50 airlines by count of flights in a league table, and we measure their performance over 6 metrics with red, amber, and green bands. I think I'm going to talk about it a little bit later. But effectively, what we are, the Fly Quiet program, is we are taking 2 strategic metrics, or 2 metrics that really are not something the airlines, or we recognize that, not something that the airlines can change on a daily basis. And it really is something that needs to be thought about well in advance, but it still drives the noise climate at Heathrow. And this is what we call the quota count per seat, and the actual noise certification and the chapter number that's associated with the aircraft type that performed the given flight. The QC per seat, it's an interesting element. It's quite difficult to explain what the QC is, but essentially it's something that the government here in the UK set out as a single-digit replacement or single number replacement for various dB levels that go back to the certification of the aircraft. So in the Fly Quiet program, what we do is we take this QC scoring mechanism that the government came up with, and then we effectively say, what is the noise efficiency of the aircraft or of the fleet of the given operator? And similarly, we are saying, what is the average chapter number? What is the typical noise certification of the aircraft that comes to Heathrow and flies out from Heathrow for the given airline? And these 2 strategic metrics are complemented by operational metrics, and these are now familiar to you. And again, it's the CDA and the track keeping. Again, we measure that on a basis, and at the same time we put out the stats in the way where we basically say what it is for each individual airline at the same time. And in the Fly Quiet, we simply take these values. So going back to the Fly Quiet program again, and just I was saying, I do hope it was good. Sorry about that. I was talking about the CDA and the track keeping as the operational metrics. And the last ones are time-bound ones that we call pre-0430 and pre-0600 violations. These are curfew times that we've set with the airlines and that are voluntarily agreed to. And they are saying if you are scheduled for landing after 0430 local time, you are not supposed to be landing prior to 0430. And similarly, if you are not scheduled for landing pre-0600 local time, you are not supposed to be touching down at the same time. And again, these form part of the flight quiet program. But here is that we've got the objective with flight quiet program to improve the overall noise environment and make Heathrow a better neighbor. Again, going back to the trust and winning the acceptance. We have found over the last 3 years that it's really an important element in the portfolio of tools for noise reduction. There are other things going on, but this we have found as a really, really useful tool. It serves quite a few purposes, which is it allows us to identify the areas that need improvement. You can say it's retrospective because it's reporting for the previous quarter. Still, it gives us the insight into where we need to focus our efforts and our energy to make the biggest difference in that sense. We don't have a big team that works at Heathrow on noise in general and these kind of topics. Really something that makes a difference that we want to put our effort into, and this helps us identify those areas. So it allows for better resource utilization, if you like. But at the same time, what we found was it introduced a kind of competition in the noise performance between the airlines, or amongst the airlines, should I say. Sometimes it's an airline against airline, as we found out. Sometimes it's simply, I want to be at the top, what do I need to do, kind of question. And we've had that, and this is really, really the main improvement that the Flight Quiet program has brought with it, is that the fact that airlines, and we've had really specific cases of airlines responding to their ranking position in the league table, or simply to the color of the dot for one of the metrics. And they actually acted on the performance after we have given them the advice why the performance was so bad or so good, or what was actually bad. Again, the data is really important here. Noise and track keeping system is helpful, is a massive help, really, in this sense. So the primary purpose of this is that it actually helps to change behaviors in terms of what airlines fly and how they fly when they come and go from Heathrow. So trying to move on because I'm conscious of the time. Airspace trials in the next slide, please. And I'm not really going to go into the detail with this, but effectively we've set off on a journey in 2011 to do the first phase of the first trial in that sense. And that did affect the positions of aircraft to some extent. But this is a really nice example. The whole set of the trials that we've done over the last 4 or 5 years really is a nice example of how much of a double-edged sword the whole noise topic can be, and any efforts that you might be doing in but with the objective to improve the noise climate. So the unintended consequence that came out of the trials was that the community became very noise sensitized, and it became very noise aware in general. And at the same time, it also gave the community a bit of a drive or a kick, if you like, to be more organized. Yep, I'm trying to stick to the time, sorry about that. And the first action groups emerged in this during these trials. So it's just an important thing to realize that sometimes making things better doesn't bring only the benefits that you expect. Moving very quickly on a slightly steeper approach trial that we've done very recently. I'm not going to go into the details of it, but effectively we've gone from 3 degrees to a 3.2 degree arrivals trial. 2,500 RNAV arrivals, of which British Airways did 85% approximately, and none of them happened in low visibility conditions. The important thing is that because of the low temperatures, what we actually achieved was a 3.14 degree slope, and the noise difference that was there was an average of half dBA and the SCR metric, and the maximum that was recorded as a difference was a minus 1.4 dBA SEL. All the details of the slightly steeper approach trial you can find on the heathrow.com/noise website. If you just look for the reports and the slightly steeper approach trial, it's all there. One of the trials that we haven't done yet, that we're working on, is the slide 13, please. Increased climb gradient trial. That's work in progress right now. So the community effectively have said most recently, we have noticed that some of the flights on some of the departure routes are lower than they used to be. We want them back. And actually looking across the world, and we are now understanding more of how things operate and how things work in the aviation world. We know that some of the airports around the world actually depart with steeper gradients than the flights at Heathrow, and we would like you to increase the climb gradient as well. So we are right now looking into a trial that will be looking at the climb gradient on one of the standard instrument departure routes, and having an increased gradient there. So what you can see there as a black line effectively is the famous 4% climb gradient that I talked about previously as a noise abatement procedure, but now this is effectively raised to 5%, and the gray swathe of dots in the picture is the actual track points and the vertical plots of these, so that you can see that there's quite a few dots that basically fail that line. So this would be an interesting test to go ahead with this trial. However, the principles for the trial and the preparation is still underway. The actual climb gradient has not been determined yet, and we are only planning to do this on one of the instrument departure routes, which is called 09 right Detling, over 2017 and 2018, but we don't have the specific dates. And if I can have the last slide, please. This is all about the making Heathrow a better neighbor part. But what does it mean, and how do we do that? This is our mantra now. We want to make Heathrow a better neighbor. It's not easy. It's really difficult to win over the support of the community. And all this work that we do here, it's really useful for the identification of shortcomings and problem areas. And it kind of allows us to propose improvements. But without the stakeholder buy-in in the desired effects, these improvements and the desired benefits are very unlikely to materialize. So the three key things that we, again, keep working around is that effectively a change can lead to improvement only if three kind of prerequisites are fulfilled in this sense. We do maintain a very, very close relationship with our air traffic control provider, which is NAT, and that's on both operational day-to-day issues, strategic issues, as well as environmental issues in this sense. But at the same time, we need to maintain the relationship with 80 plus airline stakeholders who are all customers here at Heathrow. We have one customer who forms 53% of the operation. I'm not going to mention names, but you can probably work it out who that is. Obviously, there is 79 other airlines that we need to engage with if we want to really make a difference, because it's nice to have one player doing half of the game, but actually the rest matters as well. It's all about where to put the effort and how to maintain this relationship so that it's acceptable across the board. And the last bit I'm going to mention is the noise and track keeping system is really a key enable. Getting the data out of a noise and track keeping system that has got verified and high quality data and sharing this information with the community is really something that we found is an essential thing. We cannot go and we are not able to move forward without this prerequisite. We are constantly developing this tool, and it helps us to free up resources so that we can actually do the engagement with the airlines on areas that actually need attention. And that's it from me. Thank you very much for your attention. I do hope that I'm going to be forgiven for running over by 7 minutes. I'm happy to take any questions if that's at all possible.
Don't worry, Zoltan. Now, some questions to him. Wer möchte? Fragen an?
Who wants to raise questions to Zoltan Basso?
See, there is no question at all.
That's disappointing.
Okay. So thank you very much for explaining us the measures and projects on London Heathrow.